Spoilers for the finale of The Owl House. Wow, what a great finale. There's so much they can do for season 4, right? There's so much they can do for season 4, right? The Owl House's finale premiered recently, and now that I've had the appropriate amount of time to ugly cry my heart out, I figured that this would be a good time to take what we've seen from the ending of the show and give my honest opinion on what I thought of it, what I wish we could have seen, and what I think happens next now that the show is over. Before we begin though, YouTube is very upset that I actually digest and think over my scripts instead of pumping them out like it's the only thing holding together the fabric of the universe, so I'm sorry, but I have to do the obligatory don't forget to like and subscribe and dingle that bell thing, because they really are the only reason my videos don't have like 8 views anymore. We're friends, right? You understand. Anyway, please do so if you haven't already. I seriously treasure your support. Alright, enough of this bureaucratic nonsense, let's get into my thoughts. First of all, let's talk about the strengths of this episode, because there was a ton to love. For one, this was the best paced episode in I don't know how long, and for once, I didn't feel like I was running a marathon throughout it. I mean, just look at the last 2 episodes. They were both good in their own ways, but they both ran at a breakneck pace to get the story and character set up to where they needed to be in the next episode. Pacing was already an issue in season 2, but we as a community gave understanding to it since it was a product of a production issue out of the team's control. But season 3 made season 2's pacing look tame by comparison. It got better with each episode, but for as much as I love thanks to them, it really was the most obvious instance of the story being too fast-paced of the bunch. I'm honestly really glad that this was the case, since so many people were worried that watching and dreaming was going to be rushed, when in actuality, it was the tamest pacing we had in a while. I guess those 10 extra minutes were pivotal in giving us a second to breathe after all. In terms of story, everything for the main plot essentially slapped. Bellows once again proved himself to be in the upper echelon of best villains Disney Channel's ever made from beginning to end, and his death scene was so utterly satisfying. I like his final pathetic attempt at manipulating the events in his favor. They didn't have Luce give some cringy, impassioned speech about how he's hateful and only love will persevere in the end, and that's why he lost. They just had her stand there, and those 2 looks she gave him said everything that needed to be said. His influence, not his power, was always his true strength, and at that point, no one was putting up with his crap anymore, which made this defeat almost the best way to stomp him out of this world. I'll get to that in a minute. It was also nice to get an episode where Eda, King, and Luce got one last adventure together, and we got to see them lift up someone else who was struggling with all the things that they had throughout the show. It was honestly my personal favorite aspect of the episode. I mean, yeah, it treaded new ground, but it primarily felt like it was a compilation of the best hits of the show. Not just with some of the more obvious stuff like the clips and shots from previous episodes, but even the things that could have been harder to identify, like that completely unexpected and powerful "will you choose yourself" line, or the blink and you'll miss it stuff like the references to Moose from Reaching Out and Enchanting Gromfright. By the way, if you haven't already, you should totally watch my Things You Missed video on Watching and Dreaming, because it has a lot more stuff like that. It was so cathartic to relive those moments because this was the end, and instead of just breaking new ground to wrap things up nicely, they actually gave time to pay homage to the things that made the show the powerhouse it was today. This episode also gave me another revelation in terms of a massive part of the story, and that was with the Collector. I'ma keep it real with you, Chief. I was not a fan of introducing the Collector to the show. Even now, I'm still not fully convinced that their addition was necessary and good for the show overall, but my mind was at least changed partially by this episode. For a while, I didn't see the point in this character, and they were poised to overcomplicate the plot, take away time from things that were more important, and eliminate the threat of Bellows from the show almost entirely. So I braced myself after King's Tide for what could be waiting for us in season 3. But to my surprise, they may have done more good than I expected. Sure, I, like most people, saw his misunderstood/redemption arc coming from a mile away, but I didn't really piece together just how well that arc fit within our 3 main characters as well. The Collector served as an amalgamation of all the struggles they faced and overcame throughout the show. He, like them, was also misunderstood in his intent, abandoned by their siblings, and was left all alone for something he didn't even do. Each of these things could have been used equally to describe Eda, Luce, and King at some point during the show, so having them use that to connect with the Collector's own feelings and change them for the better was a perfect epilogue epilogue to each of their own arcs. That was quite a relief for me because I was worried about how they were going to handle the Collector since King's Tide set them up to potentially supersede Belos and becoming the big bad of the show. It was absolutely a route they could have explored if they wanted to, but it wasn't what they should have done. And yes, they still did complicate the plot and take away time from other things in the show that now didn't get resolved, but they also introduced the Archivist, giving an avenue for the show to continue if they choose to do so, and more importantly, they shifted the focus back to the main three and their strong bond in a way that the show hadn't been able to do in quite a long time, and without him, I don't know that the show would have been able to do that as well as it did. There are pros and cons to the Collector being added to the show, and again, I still need to think over whether or not I agree with that choice, but at the very least, this episode made me feel something that I didn't see coming. I hope I see them again. Also freaking fantastic from this episode was the art and animation. The animation was pretty much a given considering we only had one smooth on ones animation scene in season 3 up until that point, meaning that the production team was certainly going to go all out for the last episode, but even so, it was used so wisely that there were certain shots that I didn't even notice at first were on twos, aka normal, since they were sandwiched between other smooth shots. I also appreciated how they chose to utilize this extra budget for things other than action sequences like Hunter and Willow sliding at the very end because it felt really in line with the values that the Owl House held in terms of what it considered to be important. It wasn't just about spectacle, it was also about making us feel a part of and connected to this world and the people in it. So yeah, the animation was obviously fantastic, but man, the art and character designs in this episode, oh my goodness, were hands down the best the show had to offer. I know people will think of that one design when I say that, but it wasn't just that, it was so much more. I loved King and Ida's enraged modes. I know some people will comment saying that they're just the same designs as King and the Owl Beast with extra fur and sharper faces, but I literally don't care. Their design and reveal were so striking that I honestly can't believe there aren't more people giving love towards them. Also, that Belos Goopzilla look was so damn cool. The episode even went the extra mile to make it a point to show how weak and frail Belos was getting, only to escalate him into this world-ending monster just minutes later. The fact that the face or head integrated design cues from Belos' Masked Emperor's outfit, and the body utilized his Bane of Magic form was such a great touch to an already epic design. Papa Titan, aka the Monarch, was another really strong design that, contrary to all the others, was so muted and grounded by comparison. What it did amazingly though was its ability to tell a story about who he was and what he valued by his look alone. Even before he spoke, you could tell that he was some sort of meta Owl House fan. Plus, his design has Hooty integrated into it, so you know it's an automatic 10 out of 10. But of course, the hands down best design of the whole episode was Luce's Titan form. Holy heck, that thing slaps. That thing stole the conversation for a reason. It's just that damn good. I know it's kind of a tired trope in these animated shows, you know, giving the main character an ultra-powered form in the final episode, but the Owl House once again managed to take it and put a refreshing spin on that. What do I mean by that? Look at these examples of the same thing from other shows. What do they have in common? Color. These designs are bright and vibrant and clearly distinguish the characters as light against the darkness, whereas Luce's design is the only one that actually uses dark colors instead. She ironically pops out more in a lineup of these types of characters because she's the only one that doesn't look like she's leading an all-out assault on your retinas. Again, I do love the other designs too, the Calamity Trio being a strong design as well, but it was nice that they didn't force Luce to light up the dark because the light was already inside of her. It works thematically too. The show accepts itself as different and pays respect to that in her design in what becomes the big climactic moment of the episode. It's such a good choice too, because the darkness contrasts the vibrant, colorful glyphs that radiate off of her. I mean, I'm not even the best person to talk to when it comes to artistic principles of design, but even I know that this design was an absolute W all around, and I don't think I need to say anything more than that. Lastly, the older Owl Gang's designs were awesome too, but if I dived into each of them, this video would be way too long, so I'm just gonna say that I like them, and that's all, with Amity's and Gus's being my personal favorites. Finally, we can look up Owl House characters 18 plus and not get horrifying results that made me question if humanity was a mistake. But it's not all smiles and Choco's milk, unfortunately. There were quite a few gripes that I had with this episode that really rained on my Coven State parade. And yes, the show had issues that were caused by the shortening of it and were completely the fault of Disney. But these two main issues I'm going to highlight were elements of the episode that were most likely decisions that the crew of the show made, so I feel like they're fair critiques. First and foremost, the supporting cast felt very underwhelming this episode, and it can basically be summed up in just a few words.
What's wrong with my magic?
Where the heck are we?
Is he? What is this? But what can we do?
Where's Luce?
Where's Luce?
For characters that were built up with such a strong autonomy of their own, and importantly, being able to carry multiple storylines and even episodes single-handedly, it was so weird that they were relegated to such sideline roles in this episode, and were mostly just reactionary to whatever was going on around them, minus the first few minutes of the episode. I would have much preferred that after they woke up, they found their way out of the archives and actually showed off the totality of their development in both character and skill as a part of the final confrontation with Belos. After all, they made it a point to emphasize how Luce makes her friends stronger, so I thought it would have been cool to see her power up her friends to some degree that connected their magic to the Titan, making it effective against Belos. She has 4 glyphs and 4 friends. It would have been a cool scene for everyone involved. They even had a personal connection to the different magic of the glyphs. Willow, obviously the plant glyph, Gus could have been the fire glyph, Hunter could have been the ice glyph since he learned both it and the fire glyph from her, and Amity could have been the light glyph. With their own magic combined with Luce, they could have fought off Belos too in that last scene when Luce is trying to pull Belos out of the heart. Am I the only one that thought of this? I can't be, come on. That also brings me to what I believe to be one of the biggest mistakes that not just this episode, but the show in general made, and it's what they did with Hunter. If we couldn't have had all of Luce's friends there in that final confrontation due to having too many characters to animate in a single sequence, or that it would have taken away from the growth of Ida and King, then fine. I personally think it would have been okay narratively, but fine. However, not including Hunter as a key person that brought about the downfall of Belos in his final stand was a huge mistake in my opinion. Hunter is a different story from the rest of Luce's friends. He had a deep, personal connection with Belos, maybe the deepest of any character in the show, and he was progressing from a multi-episodic arc about struggles with his identity and grief over losing his closest friend, both issues that stem directly due to Belos' actions. So the fact that his last standalone line of the whole series, 20 minutes away from the end of the episode was,
"The Collector?"
was incredibly disappointing. I was personally shocked that the Owl House crew chose not to include Hunter as a part of the final assault on Belos because it was frankly necessary to put a satisfying conclusion on these issues that he can move forward from. I guess it's acceptable that it was left as it was and for the future, but it really felt like they were building for something bigger and better. Besides, when they had all the pieces they needed already in place, Hunter trying to move on from him in the human realm only to be forcibly dragged back to him acting in a way that could cost him everyone he cared about because of the trauma and ideology he instilled in him, and Caleb and the Grimwalkers being the only thing that haunted the last, tiniest shred of humanity left in Belos, I don't get why they didn't just deliver on what would have been the perfect rejection of this cycle of torture that Belos had been subjecting Caleb to all these lifetimes. In the actual show, he died thinking humans were definitively better than and without witches, but if he saw what Hunter had risen to despite everything because of their kindness, he could have died questioning if he was right after all. For a character that was so assured of himself from start to finish, that would have been the most satisfying death of all, leaving him conflicted and uncertain. Again, it's okay that it didn't go this direction, but I still stand by that Hunter's inclusion was undeniably the better choice. The Owl House did a lot right, but Hunter not having any sort of direct reconciliation for what Belos did to him was frankly a bad call. Again, these were some of the main issues that I had from the episode that I don't think can be explained away with the shortening of the show. Just about every other issue, including unaddressed plot threads, are absolutely Disney's fault though, and pretty upsetting considering that this show was almost what I consider to be, objectively, the best animated series that Disney ever made. That honor will continue to belong to Gravity Falls in my opinion, but The Owl House is a close second. Despite that, The Owl House is indeed my favorite show, and it will always be king of my heart. Speaking of that, let's address the snaggle back in the room, the ending. I liked that the show ended with Luz getting to walk between both the realms, because honestly, if they had gone with a super sad ending of her having to choose to stay on only one side of the portal, it would have absolutely flown in the face of everything that the show had been setting up to. Of course she wasn't going to leave the demon realm. The show's purpose was to celebrate our differences, and it simultaneously kept pointing out how the normal thing to do was to leave the special world forever. There was no ending, shortening or not, where she wasn't going to choose to be in the demon realm to some capacity. I do recognize some people's criticisms where they felt that it had too much of a happily ever after vibe to it, but to tell you the truth, it was actually kind of nice that the show got to return to the season 1 slice of life feeling that it was primarily supposed to be. There were so many different ways it could have left these characters, but this ending was kind of inevitable for a while now, and frankly, was a monumental task for the team. Because of its shortening, it walks so many different paths in terms of tone, story, and structure that some people thought season 1 was the peak of the show and didn't enjoy the focus on plot from season 2 onward. Others thought season 2's first half was the best and that the rest of it didn't deliver as much as they had hoped. Some people just straight up loved the show throughout, and so on and so forth. If they had picked any other ending other than the one we got, you would have disappointed every other group who weren't a fan of the other approaches. So, I thought it was great. Not perfect, see subject the rest of this video, but great overall. I'll be rating and reviewing every episode of the show coming very soon, but to start off, I'm giving Watching and Dreaming a 9 out of 10. It may not have been the best resolution for everyone, but it certainly was the most fulfilling to every fan of the show. Now, there is one last thing I wanted to talk about before wrapping up, and it was a scene that really spoke to me on a personal level. I was doing pretty fine throughout the episode, but during that scene of Luz's realization about the glyphs no longer working, I just felt this wave of sadness wash over me. And I realized it wasn't because the glyphs were gone, it was because the show was. I made my first video essay just about a year and a half ago, and I went from an audience of 7 to 8 views to hundreds of thousands. After years of staying silent or trying to speak out but not being loud enough to hear, this show gave me a voice, a language that we could all speak together, and for once, I was heard. But with the show over and gone, all I have left is this gift it gave me. My voice, and all of you. I was afraid of what that meant for the future. Would you keep watching? And I keep dreaming? But this show left its final lesson in that scene, and thanks to them, in my heart, I'll never forget it. This scene was an acknowledgement from the creative team that this really was the end of something so special to millions of people. But instead of ending Luz's story on a depressing note about how the glyphs were gone, it reminded us that there's still so much left out there. The Owl House is over, but it did so much. It changed people's lives forever, and it wasn't just me. We were all heard in that show in one way or another. It reflected the people we were and showed us who we could be. That when it came to finding our way, that we could and should choose ourselves. That there are people out there that won't make you feel worthless. You just have to let yourself meet them. And that with the end of one chapter of our lives, there's always another. So I'll carry this voice it gave me into the next one. I'll continue to make videos about the Owl House, but other shows and movies that touched my life too. After all, it had to walk so that a show in the future could run. And I hope us weirdos can stick together and fall in love with it all over again. So, the end of the Owl House wasn't about its ending at all. In fact, fitting for Disney Channel, it was the start of something new.